You're now listening to Sound Talent Media. Check out more shows at soundtalentmedia.com.
TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of 2022. If this is any indication on how the year is going to go, we're in for some banger episodes this year. This one is fantastic. Ken Andrews is a music legend. Let's be perfectly honest. He's worked with a ton of different bands in a production sense. His band Failure is legendary, and he is just a delight to talk to. We had a great time going over gear, going over just everything. This is really a fun episode. I think you're really, really going to enjoy it. I just have one quick note before we dive into this thing. I did put out one more song before the year was over on New Year's Eve. I put out a song called The Machines Are Us. It's available wherever you stream music. So if you search American Cyclops, you will find The Machines Are Us. And it is a single. It's a big departure from the more ambient style that I've been doing. And I would love to hear what you think. It's pretty abrasive and mechanical sounding, and it is entirely based around the Maris Autobit Jr. pedal. I was literally messing with that pedal one evening. All of a sudden, that song came out. It's got a lot of sequenced bass and different stutter effects, and that all comes from the Maris Autobit Jr., and it is a fantastic little unit that is surprisingly versatile. And I don't mean to turn all of these songs into pedal demos, but some of them, really, really, well, they're essential for the song. There's Microcosm, which is obviously the hologram effects pedal, and there's Outward, which is the Cooper effects pedal, and now we have The Machines Are Us, which is the Autobit Jr. So I pull a lot out of these things as far as inspiration goes, so hopefully you enjoy these weird romps through the swamps of sound. And yeah, I would really appreciate you checking it out. I think that's enough plugging, though, for this episode. Let's dive right into this one with Ken, because I think you're going to love it. Let's do this. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Tone Mob Podcast, the show about guitar stuff, occasionally, sometimes. I'm your host, Blake Weiland, and with me today, I have Ken Andrews from Failure and like 4 million other things. So what's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, dude. This is exciting for me. I remember way back when I was recording this podcast in various parking lots and in cars and, random places with my cell phone. I talked to my friend Paul Roney, who made one of my favorite guitars. And it was like one of the first times I'd had somebody recommend me an album via the internet on the podcast. And it was the previous Failure record.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I used to listen to that band. I didn't realize it was like this whole thing that I'm sure a lot of people did. They're like, I didn't realize, oh, they're back. Cool. And then that record came out and it was awesome. And so this is a real treat for me. It's kind
Cool.
of a circling of the wagon, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, we started, the band actually had its first rehearsal where we actually got together in the same room and played music in '89.
wow.
So we've been around for a while. I mean, it's weird having that huge gap in the middle of things.
Yeah.
Just historically to kind of like process the whole canon of what we've made. But I mean, for us personally, it was like when we kind of got back together, the first few times we got back in the room together after the big break, the 16 years or whatever, it was like people were just kind of had these weird giddy smiles on their faces because we were just like, it was like our hands knew where to go for the old songs, even though it had been so long. Like I
Wow.
remember singing because I could kind of, singing is like a little more automatic. You remember the melodies and the lyrics and stuff. But
Yeah.
like whether or not the second chord in the chorus was E or B is not something you would be able to just like say, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
you know all the chords, right? Yeah. The second chord is what? No, I literally remember looking down singing and seeing my hand move, but I wasn't controlling it. It was just like, wow, it just knows that that's the right chord. Cool. Okay, I'm just gonna let you do your thing over here.
Right. It's like almost like the subconscious was taking over and piloting the meat vehicle there for a minute.
That's right. Yeah, it was, and and I looked around and the other guys had that kind of like awkward little smile on their face, like, what's happening right now?
It doesn't seem like I can't think of very many other bands that have, been together so intensely for so long and then had that big gap and came back with the same amount of force that you guys did. Is it because that chemistry was just somehow still there naturally, or what do you attribute that to?
I would say two things. I would say one, first and foremost, what you just said, like the thing, whatever it is, the chemistry was still there, and it still resulted in the sound of the band when we played. So that, yeah, but B was we had the desire to not come back and just do a reunion tour or not come back and do like a couple crappy songs or something.
Right.
Like it was like, there's like a bunch of bands in history who've kind of broken up at different times in their career. And people always talk about, you want to go out on a high note.
Right.
And even though we broke up in 97 under stressful, not planned for conditions, in hindsight, like even just a few years later, I thought I had my freaking do not disturb on. Sorry about that.
No worries. I didn't hear it. So you're
Okay,
good.
good.
Yeah.
We just wanted to make sure that we weren't going to make the same mistakes that we had seen other
Right.
acts do. And I think I think my thought was even just like, even in 99 and 2000, I could see that, as stressful and as kind of depressing as the breakup was in 97, creatively and artistically, our output at the end was actually, we went out on a high note.
Yeah.
So if you're going to reform and your last album was Fantastic Planet, like, what are your intentions? You know what I mean? Like why ruin this for everybody,
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
why for yourself, for your fans? It's just like, why waste everybody's time if you're just going to come back to try to make a few bucks quick?
Right. It's you never want to be that one that's like, man, they should have quit permanently. Like, you don't want to do that.
Like, I mean, one of my favorite bands in the history of rock bands is The Police.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of people were pretty bummed that they went out on Synchronicity. It's like, and including Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland.
Right.
Who have said, like, we felt like we were at the top of our game. We're only 4 albums in. Let's keep going. Well, okay. But in hindsight, I mean, they never screwed up. I mean,
Right.
every one of their records is good, I think. I mean, so, the early stuff was quite different than where they ended up. So it's a little, I could see how some people might not like the very early stuff. But to me, there's a very respectable like progression there of where they went. And I don't know. I was kind of like, I wouldn't say happy that that was their last album, but it was just like, wow, well, at least they didn't screw it up, you know?
It's a bittersweet thing. It's like you don't want to see them quit, but you also don't want to see them make something that makes you bummed either. Like it's both. Like I'd be more upset if they made something that it's just like, it's kind of like in another entertainment field, it's like the equivalent of Vince Gilligan taking Breaking Bad down at the right time. He was like, we can't take this show if we just keep going, and then it turns into The Walking Dead, where it's just, okay, now it's another episode, Instead, they took it out when it was at its peak. It was never going to get any better than that, and they stopped that particular series, And bands can do the same thing. And the difference is, I think it's harder to know when you're the artist intimately creating on that level. I think you're so close to it, it can be hard to know if you've hit that point or not. And I feel like you guys were able to recognize that in a way more on the Reformation. How do you identify that?
That's a really good question. So there's a bunch of different narratives about how the band and why the band even got back together. Some people were like, because we played Maynard Keenan's 50th birthday as one of our very first shows. It was actually not our first show back. It was the second show back. They kind of thought that Maynard asking us to do that show was the reason we got back together. And the timeline actually fits that could be the case, but that was actually not the case. When he called me, and I hadn't spoken to him in years, he wasn't aware that just, I think, 10 days prior, we had actually already booked the El Rey show, which was our first show back in 2014. And so it was just a kind of happy accident that he was like, so would you consider getting the band back together just to do this show for my birthday? And I was like, well, actually, we're already back together. It was kind of very fortuitous that you called, because we're actually playing our first show back like just a few weeks before your birthday show at the El Rey. Mm-hmm. And he was like, oh, okay, cool. Awesome. Well, that works out for everyone.
Yeah, no kidding.
So
and then you didn't have to cram for it. You were already practicing.
We kind of had already talked about it. But so what I don't think most people know, I mean, they would if they'd heard me tell this story, but the reality is that we didn't even book that show, the El Rey show, until we had already started working together in the studio. And we hadn't really brought Kelly in at that point. It was just Greg and I working in my studio, because I already had this whole idea about not wanting to come back and just do a reunion show.
Right.
If we were going to come back, we're going to be a band that makes new music and that tries to do something that is worthy of people, spending their time listening to it, Mm-hmm. So we had actually already gotten pretty far down the path of having, I think, 2, maybe 3 songs that would actually end up appear on The Heart is a Monster.
Oh, wow.
And so that was my test. It was like, well, okay, if we are going to go ahead and book a show and kind of dip our toe in the water, before we even do that, I wanted to know that we still have it, that we still have something that is going to be entertaining to me, but also like show that the band is like trying to like progress.
Right.
Trying to keep its identity, but actually not just remaking one of our previous records. And so I felt I had that proof in the 3 songs that we had already started.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's and then the rest is what we did. So
I think the latest record is actually possibly an even better example of pushing things forward in my viewpoint. I was listening to it this morning going like, this is failure, but it's not at the same time. It's not a rehash, I should say. The newest records, I was just kind of surprised. The
I'm just taking my
directions that.
sweatshirt off real quick.
Okay, no worries. I understand.
The coffee is starting to warm me up a little bit.
Yep.
Okay, keep going.
Okay. I was actually a little bit surprised at when I think of Failure, I think of really dense, thick sounds for a lot of the tracks. At least that's what sticks in my brain. And I was surprised at how much atmosphere was injected into this latest one and how it fits the title so well. Was this latest record? Was this an intentional exploration of the more airy side of things? I mean, there's definitely dense moments, but it's such a it's not a departure, but it's new, in my ears anyway.
Yeah. No, I feel exactly the same way. Yeah, departure might be a little bit strong, but there's new things going on. Especially, I think, how would I say this? I think if you kind of like the feeling that you get from the music is probably, the moods and stuff are probably kind of similar, because that's maybe the core identity of the band, is kind of like this darker, moody kind of thing, the feeling you get from listening to the music. But the records, and especially this record, we tried to create those same feelings, but using different techniques.
Right.
Like part-wise, like how the parts, how each person's part was relating to the other two guys' parts. Like, instead of we're just really not super interested in playing anything together anymore. Or like tracking each other, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like doubling or kind of like guitar following the root notes of the bass with chords or something like that. Like that, I just, that's just something that none of us are really just interested in musically. So we don't do it really.
Yeah.
And then, but on this album, I think what happened is because we decided to spend so much time for sort of formally doing these improv sessions, or jam sessions as people call them. Like we said, okay, let's do this for a month and not try to write a song, just try and come up with ideas that are sort of stream of consciousness, things you can't do when you're just alone trying to compose a song.
Yeah.
Just get that weird kind of like, thing that happens, and when you have three people reacting off each other. So, and I think what just happened is that where we were all at musically and technique and and songwriting technique, we were just pushing each other. Okay, cool. That's your bass line. Well, this is my guitar part, which is like, it fits, but just barely. You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
And finding those moments where it does just barely fit, but just kind of seems like, I don't know, just has this like kind of inexplicable quality to it. That kind of thing where it's hard to take it apart technically and say, well, the reason this is catchy or cool or whatever is because this, and this. It became this whole thing of like, can we make musical moments that just are just inexplicably cool in a way?
Yeah.
And so we pushed ourselves for a whole month and doing those improvs, and specifically sort of restraining ourselves from saying, okay, this is a cool idea we just came up with, let's expand it into a full song and let's write. Instead of doing that, we as soon as we felt like we had kind of like defined an idea or came up like, okay, well, there's that idea, we would just move on.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So all we're trying to do is just create moments, really. In fact, if you listen to the whole thing, which is like 40 plus hours of nonstop improv, you hear like ideas sort of like start, they kind of ramp up, and then they peak, and then they just drizzle apart, or
Mm-hmm.
just, just kind of fall apart. And then we're on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And there's no talking, like hardly any talking. We just got down to it. And I have to say that, like, at the end, after taking a break for a week or two and then listening back, I was like, okay, like there's a lot of crap in here, but there's some really good stuff, like way more than I thought when we were doing it. And I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to Greg about that. It was like, when we were doing it, I think we all kind of well, at least Greg and I kind of walked away slightly disappointed, depressed, dejected, because we spent 3.5 weeks in there. And I think we both kind of felt, well, if we get 2 or 3 songs out of it, that'll be a good thing, because I didn't really hear that much. And, and like as the months went on, as we kind of like poured over all that material, we realized, actually, no, now I can now see that there's probably actually 2 to 3 albums worth of material in there.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, I definitely know that feeling where I kind of, part of what I do to relax in the evening is come out here and plug in 400 different pedals and just zone out. And I've started recording it. And most of the time I'll leave and be like, nah, that was fun for me, but it wasn't anything worth anything,
Mhm.
But once in a while, I'll go back and I'll have jammed for like an hour and a half, and I'll be like, there's like 4 different genuinely decent ideas I can springboard off of in there. And it's always surprising to me when it happens. And I think that is part of just letting go and
Mhm.
letting what happens happen. And it may not always make it might not make logical sense in the moment, but you come back with fresh ears later and you can appreciate what came out of the situation. That sounds very similar to what you guys did.
That's exactly what we did. Maybe just, a little bit more formalized, in the sense that, yeah, we rented a space. The 3 of us went in there. We took all of our equipment, all of our guitars, and multi-tracked recorded everything
Yeah.
for weeks. So it was just kind of like an expanded version of what we've done on, I would say, about maybe half the albums, where we have
Cool.
said, let's just take some time and just kind of like jam a little bit, see where we're all at, like, creatively, like what we're interested in, maybe grab some new pedals or some new guitars or something, and try, just see where we're at. But this time was like, actually, let's do that, but let's like an expanded version of that.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say that you were kind of hinting at, when you were just talking there, was that one of the things that both Greg and I are kind of fascinated about is that, on average, most of our favorite little musical nuggets from those improvs, most of us can't remember playing it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I've kind of gone back and looked at the timestamps, and what I've noticed is that at the end of the week, the last, like, Thursday and Friday, because we were just doing Mondays through Friday, and like Thursday and Friday evenings late were probably where the most interesting stuff came from.
Yeah.
And it made us think of this whole thing that Stanley Kubrick, the famous film director who did 2001: A Space Odyssey, he would talk about working with actors and doing multiple takes for the same scene. And he would say, yeah, you can, sometimes you can get like something good from the actors in the first 2 takes or so. And then you kind of have to keep going for a while. If you didn't get what you wanted in those first 2 or 3 takes, you have to keep going for a while, because the actors start to overthink it. And then you kind of just have to keep going, because he was famous for doing 30, 40, 50 takes
Mm-hmm.
which nobody at the time was doing because everything was still shot on film back then, and that was expensive.
Oh yeah, that's
Like,
a lot on the cutting room floor.
yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, actors like you get to 30 takes with an actor, and what was happening mentally was that he was kind of breaking them down, basically, in a way. And he would basically say, yeah, so there's like, yeah, from take 3 to take 20, it's just going to be a bunch of shit that they learned in acting school.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And then once you get like further out, and they're almost like giving up, you know, because they don't know what to do.
Well, they don't know what he wants.
They don't
Like,
know what he wants.
Yeah. Like,
And that's when he says you get the magic, right? And but so I was just kind of relating that to our thing, and I'm just kind of thinking, what happened for us is I think when we were just literally the most exhausted and the most just like, I just want to go home. I'm hungry. You know, like I'm just like, or you're not even there. You're just kind of like zoning out in a way.
yeah.
I think that's when some of the most interesting things actually came up. And I mean, I know for a fact that like Headstand came from one of those moments because none of us can ever remember playing anything from that jam.
It's not, what you're saying is not weird to me at all. My whole last record, which was my first thing I ever did solo, was all done in that state of mind. I was all late at night. I was exhausted. The first real song that I ended up using came after, it came on rather, the 6th. And I was stressed, and I think everybody in the country was at the time, just in general. And I was just not feeling very good. And then this thing came out, and I felt a lot better. And I went back and listened to it. And I'm like, I don't know who did that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. Like, I wasn't me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that happened. But I know those states you're talking about where you're just like, it's almost like that's when the literal muse takes over. It's like, I'm driving this train now. And you guys are doing it all together, which is even more magical. That's got to feel insane when you listen back.
It was really, I mean, it took a long time because I think as people who've done any editing of any kind of media, if it takes you 3-4 weeks to create those files, it's going to take you at least double the time to edit them.
100%.
Because you have to at least listen to it and evaluate it and then go back and cut it. And then, you know, it's just like, right? You know, it just takes a long time. So thankfully, even though that was like a 3-month period, basically, where I was editing and kind of whittling down and making sort of like highlights reels.
Yeah.
Different kinds of tempos. Like here's a bunch of fast ideas that are like kind of cool. What do you guys think? As I was making those, it was enjoyable because it was more enjoyable than actually doing the improvs.
I could see that.
Because
you're actually,
you don't get to walk away from those jams with something to listen to where you're like, oh, this is awesome. You know, we just
right.
we didn't allow ourselves that luxury. And maybe that, I don't know if that was a good idea or a bad idea, but it is what it is. But I was going to say the muse, what is the muse? I mean, if you're going to get into the science of it, I think maybe what we really did on this album and by doing this longer sort of improv phase of the record, I think what we were trying to do is try to cultivate turning off our left brains.
Okay. Was that intentional, or did you just?
I didn't think about it at the time when I was booking the studio.
Yeah.
But now I'm kind of thinking, having lived through doing that and driving home every night going like, what the hell happened today? Like, I don't even like, just kind of, you know, in a bit of a fog about it.
Yeah.
I think what that was what we were trying to do. We were trying to force ourselves into a position where you just kind of like give up in a way. You kind of, or the editor in you gives up and kind of just walks out of the room.
kind of like, I can't do anything with this guy. I'm out. I'm gonna let him do his thing.
Where's the next part? Where's the arrangement? Where's the lyrics? Where's all of the things that you need, the components to finish a song? We never let that person have a say,
Right.
Until
I
later.
love that.
We segmented those things. We said, okay, here's the right brain process, and then here's the left brain / right brain, through the overdub and the spinning these ideas into arrangements and songs and lyrics, and so they felt like complete things.
Do you think that you'll take that approach again, or do you want to go back to the more structured form? Because I think there's merits to both.
Oh,
How are you
there's
feeling
definitely
right now?
merits to both. And
Yeah.
and I should qualify by saying that this shorter record, there's 10 songs, right? So it's not the whole record. It's the majority of the record is sourced from those jams, but there are 1, 2, 3. I think there's 4, but I think there's either 3 or 4. The 3 that I can think of right now are Bring Back the Sound, Undecided, and Half Moon.
Mhm.
Those were all composed those were composed in a more like normal way, where either Greg or I was writing the nuts and bolts of the song by ourselves.
Right.
And then
Right.
coming in and saying, hey, I have this song, here it is. That was certainly the case with like Bring Back the Sound, where I wanted to actually compose something in a more normal way, like we were just talking about, where you're like, okay, here's a guitar part. I think this could be an intro, and now I'm gonna work on a transition, and and then I'm gonna come up with vocal melody and lyrics, and so that song was written in the more formal kind of or normal way, I would say.
Yeah.
And I was a little concerned that those songs weren't fitting actually on the record for a while. But then Greg came up with a sequence where he was, I was like, I told him, I'm a little concerned. Like, is this record a little too varied, a little too, like the moods are shifting too much? And he's like, give me a minute. I'm going to show you something. And he showed me something, and I was like, damn, this is making sense to me now. It like the contrast, he made the contrast between the songs actually work.
Right.
And feel cool, as opposed to feeling disjointed.
Right. More of a transition rather than just a hard stop and like, here's the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, that reminds me of this stupid moment when in high school when we played Battle of the Bands. And we had one original song and 2 covers or whatever. The original song was like 3 different songs just kind of together. They were all okay ideas on their own. They made no sense all jammed together. Like it was the dumbest thing. One of the dumbest musical choices I've ever made. I'm glad it doesn't really exist anywhere except some old VHS tape. But supposedly this show is about gear, or at least that's what I trick people into believing when they click on it. So you've had a wide variety of things that you've used over the years. So rather than just going over that whole journey, which I think that would take 4.5 hours probably. I wanted to ask you whether it's a record that you worked on in a production and in recording capacity, or whether it's something you personally made. What are some of your favorite tones that you've came up with, and do you remember what the rig looked like for those moments?
Well, first of all, the journey with failure and gear was just, that's one of the things that is just so different from the 90s to now.
Right.
Because the technology completely changed during that break.
Yep.
And when Greg and I were sort of doing those initial writing sessions in 2013, that would become the Heart is a Monster. I wasn't in. I was not. I was aware of, but I was not a part of the whole amp modeling thing yet. I had in fact, that studio that I had at that time I had built a dedicated amp closet, essentially.
Ooh, yeah.
That had room for, I had 4 different speaker cabinets in there. I had a Marshall, I had a Vox, I had a Twin, and then like a small speaker thing too. And it was all mic'd up all the time, going into preamps ready to go. I just had to arm a track in Pro Tools and I could be playing through whatever amp I wanted.
I love that.
Yeah, it was great. And it worked. And I did a lot of records that way. And so that's what I was familiar with. Then as we started, and that's what we actually recorded with on those very early tracks. But as the idea of playing live started to take shape, and the idea of trying to cover and try to do all the sounds that we had, even just on the first 3 90s records, those rigs that we had at the end of 97 when we broke up, they're way gone. They were all part. I mean, there's some pedals I still have from those rigs, but like the whole infrastructure of having a giant rack with 2 preamps, 2 power amps, switching system for analog pedals and stuff. My memory of it was not super. I didn't have a good memory of that stuff. I mean, I liked the sound and it was fun, but the reality of those rigs were super prone to breaking down.
Right.
You had hundreds of connectors and cables in them, and if you did have a problem, like trying to chase it down would become an all-day affair.
Oh yeah.
And there were just so
yes.
many shows where something would go wrong, and I would during the actual show, and I would have to just resort to going to a sort of backup cable straight into one of the amps, and just kind of like limp through the rest of the show with no effects or very few effects or whatever. And that part of it was like really starting to come back to me, and I was like, God, and then the idea of the expense of trying to rebuild something like that. And I was talking to my friend Billy Howardell from Perfect Circle, and he's like, well, haven't you ever, do you know about fractals? And I was like, what are fractals? And he's like, I'm going to come over. I'll be over in like an hour. And he brought me his fractal, or one of his fractals, because he already had several. Now, he wasn't actually, and I don't think he still uses the amp modeling part of them, because he still likes to use he has a particular Marshall half stack that he likes to use live.
Okay.
Specifically because he puts it like a certain number of feet away from his mic, or where he's mostly standing. It's like 15 feet or 20 feet or something like that. And he can get this sort of like perfect singing feedback.
Gotcha.
And it's part of his sound for like 2 or 3 of their songs. So he kind of needs he at least needs the speaker cabinet thing, working a certain way for his performance.
Right. No quiet soundstage for him. That's not going to work.
I don't think so. He just hasn't embraced the full modeling thing. I take that. I think he's getting closer and closer though, because I think there are some clean sounds where he's using the amp modeling in the fractal. So yeah, I don't know, but he turned me on to those. And then another artist friend of mine, Anthony from M83, which is a whole different kind of band.
Right.
He was like, oh yeah, I know, I heard about fractals, but I have this other one. And now I'm spacing on that name. What's the other? Kemper.
Okay, yeah, probably a Kemper.
Kemper.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And at that point, this is like 2014. Those were like kind of like the two big boys on the block in terms of really high tech and realistic amp modeling. There were some other, like Line 6 was starting to get into that world, but they hadn't really come out with the
Helix yet. Yeah.
The Helix yet, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I messed around with both of those for almost a month because I was like, well, at first I did it for like a week and I was like, okay, I'm sold. Like this is doable for live for sure. And then it was like another week or so of deciding which platform to use.
Yeah. Yeah.
And ultimately we decided to go with the Fractal. I just feel like it just fits my workflow better. I like having the USB controller and really being able to do much more sophisticated and kind of creative signal routing.
Mm-hmm.
That it's just it's a deeper box. And in some cases for a lot of people, that's why they don't like it. And I totally get that. The Kemper looks more like it's designed to be a much softer landing for people who are just used to having like 6 knobs on a real tube head.
Yeah, definitely.
But at that point, I'm already like 20 years into making records in Pro Tools, so I'm a digital boy at that point. So, and they're small, right? The weight difference between one Fractal and the rig that I had in 1996 was like, I don't even know, like 10 pounds compared to like 300 pounds probably.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
So we just went down that path and I have not regretted it at all. In fact, for me, I find it to be a much more creative platform to work in because you don't have to be like, oh shit, I just need one more cable that's 4 inches long to go between this pedal and this pedal. You know what I mean? I mean, we still actually do that. We still do put pedals in front of the Fractals, but I would say for so many sounds now, I can get what I want pretty quickly, and I don't even need to use any pedals.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you use it in the studio as well as live, or do you kind of go more old school in the studio?
No.
Doing it all.
No. I have to tell you, there's like the amount of real amps. Now we have three records in the 2000s: Hard as Monster, In the Future, and Wild Type Droid, this new one. 3 full albums. The amount of real amps on those 3 albums is probably 2%, 3%.
Wow.
Like Wild Type Droid, for instance, there's only one section of one song. It's the last song on the record, Greg's song, Half Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only in the bridge because the rest of it's more like just acoustic guitar kind of ballady thing. And then drums and electric guitars come in the bridge. And those electric guitars, there's like a couple tracks of just chords, and then there's some feedback tracks. Those are the only real amp tracks on the entire album.
Wow. And it sounds awesome. I literally just spent the whole morning with it again. So,
well, I think I've spent a lot of time with the Fractals now, and I know people are like, I've heard mixers say this. When I get a album where they've tracked all the different guitar parts with a modeler, I have a lot harder time mixing those songs because I find like I can't get separation between the parts because all the modeling sounds sort of have this similar character or just overarching profile that doesn't lend itself to separation or definition or, whatever. That's bullshit. Sorry for swearing, but like that's just not real. It is so not real, because what is really happening in those modelers is that they have modeled like hundreds of different real amps. So when you pull up a Fender Twin in the Fractal, it sounds like a Fender Twin. It doesn't sound like a Marshall. It
Right.
has the same amount. I mean, a Fender Twin and a Fractal with a Marshall playing together sounds, if they're both in the Fractal, that combination has the exact same characteristic as if in the real world, where you have a Fender and a Marshall together. It's the way it is. So when people hear this record and they're like, but you got so many different sounds. Yeah, because we use different amps. That's really all it is.
I wonder if the people complaining about that are running into the situation where whoever recorded it didn't use different amps. So
I think that's what it is.
It's like, they all use Marshall JCM 800 clone or models. Well, no, I can't. Wow, they all sound the same. Amazing. Like, who'd have thunk it? You wouldn't do that in the studio with the regular amps. At least I don't. I've never been anywhere that did. So why would you do that? I mean, that's the beauty of the modeling, in my opinion. Like, I really like using real amps, but I'm a spoiled little boy, and I don't tour, and I can play out here and make a big mess, and I'm not on any deadlines. I'm just doing it for myself. So I don't need to be efficient. I can be dumb about it. But what I've found is that every time I don't remember to run a DI out as well, so that I can play with models later, I always kick myself, because it's like, I've actually recorded with real amps before, and then listened back and went, that felt good in the room, but it didn't translate to the recording. Good thing I have a DI, and then I'll play around with different amp models until I get something or mix something in with the real amp till I get something I really like. So I'm really coming around on it. I used to be pretty firm in the hardware world, but the technology's too good now. It's
so good. I mean, It's so good. There's so many people who say they could tell the difference that I guarantee you I could fool them with a blind A/B test.
I've fooled myself.
I see it happen all the time. Mastering engineers thinking a file was either mixed in the box or not mixed in the box.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have to master this in the box mix. Yeah, it actually wasn't in it, or it was, and it's great. You know what I mean? Like, they get confused. There's just no way you can accurately tell. I just don't think it's. I think that argument is over, personally. Now, there are some practical considerations that you have to think about. One of them is, because I get some people asking me, well, my band we're just starting out, and we've got a few originals, and we want to play this local bar, and what do you think about fractals? And I'm like, in that situation, might be a little tough. Might be a little tough, because bars and house parties and stuff like that, like, you're gonna have a limited PA that's probably just designed to get some vocals over the drums and not even sound good doing it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So there are venues where the whole idea of how the venue is set up is that they expect the band to have an actual real backline.
Yeah.
And they might not even mic the amps, because what's the point? They don't have the PA to support that.
Yeah.
So in those situations, you're really just starting out and you're playing like small bars and stuff, like, maybe just have a few pedals and a combo amp.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a
Definitely.
lot of damage, and you get, and then it comes down to there's sort of one maybe Achilles heel not Achilles heel, but like one disadvantage to modeling if you run like we do live, which is we don't bring anything that has a speaker cone in it.
Oh,
when
wow.
we tour. Nothing. We use the speakers in the venues. Meaning the PA, obviously. But also what we do is we usually turn the monitors, the floor wedges, around facing the audience and use those as front fills. Our sound person will put the mix into those so that people in the front are kind of experiencing what they would with a band with normal backline.
Right.
So that they can, if you're literally the person right center front, right at the barricade, and you're watching a band that only uses modelers and has no amps on stage, and the PA is literally flanked, you're like almost even with it, but it's like, 50 feet left and 50 feet right of you. It's basically blowing past you.
Yep. It sounds weird.
It sounds weird. And so you're hearing all this reflected shit coming back from the back wall and whatever. So you're feeling the bass because bass travels everywhere, and the subs might be right in front of you. But like to hear vocals and guitars, like crunchy guitars right there, you need to have some speakers for those people. So we've been sort of we focus on that when we show up. Like that's one of the first things we talk to the local venue people about is front fills.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a back line. And so but getting back to the kind of disadvantage of doing that for some people is that, well, how do you get feedback? Guitar feedback. Because guitar feedback, it's one of those things you just got to have it, right? If you
Totally, you got to.
I mean, we've used it like in a very like musical way. Sometimes we actually have parts that call for it.
Oh yeah.
And you have to be able to get it. So that's been the one area where it's been like, it might cause us to have to use a particular guitar because certain guitars feedback better than others or are more controllable. And or we just have to kind of like test and sound check that we're able to get feedback from the PA usually.
Yeah.
Even though it's far away and not pointed at us at all, we can.
It might reflect just right.
It can reflect just right. And we could just like sometimes we'll spend 5 minutes in sound check going, you know what? This PA is so separated from the stage. Which is great design, really acoustic great, because that's what you want. That we're not able to get feedback from the PA. It's just like really well designed PA installation.
It's too good.
Yeah, too good. And at that point, we may take one or two wedges, and if we weren't using them for front fills, then we'll actually point them out, in a more traditional way at us, pointing up at us, and put our fractal outputs in them.
I don't know if this will work at all. Are you using any pedals live into the fractals?
Yes. And then the other thing we use, which I think you're going to say, is feedback pedals.
The Digitech Freakout.
Exactly.
I love that
we have all of those.
Perfect. I assumed so.
Yeah. I don't need them because it just turns out on most of the songs where we need feedback, I'm playing bass.
Yeah.
And also, I have a lot of other things going on in my world, like all the lyrics and stuff. So I just want to keep my station as clean as possible so I can just focus on performing. But Greg has a full pedal board in front of the fractal, and because he likes to tweak and experiment and do weird stuff that isn't the same every night with his pedals.
I can relate to that.
Oh yeah, it's and I love that, and I love that he does that.
But you're busy.
But I if he wasn't doing that, then I would probably have to do it. But he's already doing it, and he's covering it, and it's awesome that I don't have to deal with that. So I have no audio out at my station at all.
Wow.
I'm
Super
wireless out of my guitar. straight back to the fractal rack.
Wow. That is about as clean as it gets. We're getting close to the end here, and I better at least grab a couple of the questions from the Facebook group, or they will get me in trouble.
Sure.
We talked a lot about we totally covered that question. It was all about what we just talked about. This is probably the most concise one. So my buddy Jason Fuzzmonger, he's a moderator, big supporter of the show. He wants to know what was responsible for the bass sound on Fantastic Planet. He says it's the unsung hero of that album.
The bass equipment that we used during that album was basically what we had for live at that point, which was the standard SVT, Ampeg SVT, 8x10 cabinet and humongous overpowered tube head.
Nice.
Right? Like that. I mean, that's like the iconic thing, right?
Totally.
Yeah. So we had one of those, and we used it live, and it was freaking loud. And so that was like, I would say that's like the main amp thing, and just a cord going into it. We had to put it in a back bedroom of the house because it's so loud. But we also had a pedal board in front of it that had I think 3 pedals, really simple. And basically those pedals were all designed to have create a distorted sound.
Okay. Yeah.
So like if you turned them off, there was some grind on the unpedaled sound, but not overly so.
Yeah.
Like he could, if you played soft, you could do the cleaner sections and the quiet parts and stuff. But when you engaged the pedals on the pedal board, you had I can't remember. I think it was a turbo rat.
Oh, okay.
Which I don't even know why.
Because it says turbo.
But it's just what we had.
Yeah.
It was like a turbo rat into the Boss bass EQ pedal, graphic EQ pedal, which was brown, I think, and then a tuner pedal. So I think it was just those 3, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, it was real simple. It was like, yeah, the rat was providing the distortion, and the bass EQ pedal was sort of replacing the lost low end that you got when you engaged a rat pedal. Because rat pedals, at least back then, were meant for guitar, and a lot of the distortion circuits, they didn't even bother with. I mean, it was everything below 100 was just kind of cut off. And it was about, the mid range and the fuzz and so we wanted that on the bass, but we still wanted low end.
Yeah.
So if you would have looked at that bass EQ pedal, it was basically like the right side, which is the high end sliders, were flat, and then as soon as you got to the mid range, they started going up, and then by the time you were like in bass zone, like 100 or 50, those were just all the way up.
Yep. Just putting that back in.
in. And then the other thing that I think contributed to the sound was that we would, after the pedal board, we would split the sound. So like you would go into a DI and then also to the amp.
Popular.
Yeah, it's my son. He's calling me. So what was I going to say? And the DI, so instead of just like a straight DI box, we had this thing called a Demeter tube bass preamp. That was a rack mount unit.
I've seen those. Yeah.
And that thing had a really cool sort of mojo with the bass guitar we were using at the time, which was a wall.
Oh, okay. I forgot about those.
It just like it almost seemed like there was a bit of an octave, like a low, like it was somehow adding a low octave. It was very weird.
It's just like somehow the distortion in that was causing a harmonic down a little bit, or
But it
something.
wasn't distorted.
Weird.
Yeah. And I do remember, and I didn't take good notes at all. I did find some track sheets from that record, but like I did not take good notes. But I seem to remember on each individual song with the bass, I would experiment with either having that Demeter bass preamp, getting its signal either pre or post the distortion, depending on the song.
Okay.
Okay, so sometimes only the amp would be getting the distortion pedals. Sometimes only the Demeter would get the distortion pedals. And sometimes they would both get the distortion pedals, depending on how much distortion you wanted for the part.
Right.
So the song Heliotropic, which probably has the most where you can really hear the fuzzy bass in the intro. That was both the Demeter and the Ampeg getting the distortion.
It's so good. I love it. That was great. That was a great answer. I'm glad. Sometimes people can't remember when it's that long ago. So that was
well, I've gotten
nice.
so many questions about it that I've gone through the archive of the very limited archive of photos that were taken in that sort of makeshift control room that we made.
Yeah.
And there was one photo of the floor under the under the desk.
Yeah.
Where you could see that pedal board. And
awesome.
I just saw it like a year and a half ago. And I was like, oh, there's the bass pedal board. Finally, I know what we did. And you can actually see the chords. And yeah, and then it all kind of came rushing back.
That's awesome. Well, the only other question I think you probably have time for in the Facebook group is just, do you think you're going to be putting more videos out on YouTube anytime soon? And that's from Shane Huckaba. Hopefully I pronounced his last name right.
Failure music videos or Ken Andrews YouTube channel videos?
I believe he's asking about Ken Andrews YouTube channel videos.
Okay, yeah, I know. I mean, we were talking about this before we started the interview. Just I'd be totally honest. My YouTube channel is just like right at that point where it's like, I've got like 15,000 subscribers or whatever. And it's just at that point where it's like not quite successful enough to hire someone to help me.
Right. I know what you're talking about.
You know what I'm saying? Like where it's like, oh, it's just like a few more subscribers and then it would make sense to actually hire someone to help me edit the videos, because that's the only reason the frequency of my videos is so low.
Right.
It's just really time consuming. I'm very particular about how they look and how they are edited, and I'm just doing so many other things. It's really hard. But I don't know if this person saw, but I did just drop one like yesterday about my studio.
I think the question was actually asked last week, so they may have seen that by now.
Okay, so. Yeah. I just dropped one about my studio here and all the hardware that I use. I didn't go into the like plugins and software because I've already covered that so much in other videos about how I mix in Pro Tools. So I just covered like my hardware, like the computer, the mic preamps and stuff like that. I did also exclude all the instruments because that would have made it so much longer.
That's a tale for another day.
Yeah. So I'm going to do I think I'm going to do a live one on the Failure Live Gear, which uses all of my guitars and the fractals and stuff like that.
Awesome. I'm going to go check that out for sure, because I'm in the middle of rebuilding my whole studio setup right now. So I'll be curious to see what you're using. I'm going to go watch that as soon as we're done.
I mean, I think you'll be surprised. A lot of it's really old. I mean, there's some really new pieces, but a lot of it I've had for 20 years.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's fun. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
All right, so I do have 2 more classic questions before we totally wrap this up. But before I do that, this is where I like to give the guests the opportunity to, plug whatever they want to plug, shout out their grandma, whatever they want to say. This is like your moment to just take the floor and talk to a couple thousand people.
Are you asking me something right now?
Yeah, I'm just saying if you have anything it's just your time to shine. If you want to plug something that you've been working on.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear
Yeah,
the first
yeah.
part of what you just said. Well, I mean, I just obviously want to plug the new album. I mean,
Of
that's why
course.
we're here. I mean, what I really would love to plug, but I can't do it just yet because it hasn't been completely 100% finalized. But there will be a tour announcement coming up in a matter of weeks.
Ooh, there we go. That's a good enough teaser. I think that counts. Cool. All right, final questions. This one's usually goes pretty quickly, and then we get into the big controversial one to wrap this up. So,
Okay.
First question is, what is your favorite Boss pedal?
Actually, I would say that's actually not that hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
Boss BF2 flanger, Purple Boy.
Me too.
Really?
I love the BF2. Yes, I love my BF2.
It's
so good.
It's got such an extreme sound.
Yes.
And there's so many cool things you could do when your guitar is oscillating or in feedback with it. I mean, it is all over all the Failure records pretty much because it's in the Fractal now. They just added it like a couple years ago.
Nice.
And I mean, I just listen. You know what record? I don't even know if people know this, or maybe they do. But you know what record has just a huge amount of BF2 on it is Prince's Purple Rain.
Oh yeah, yes.
I mean, every solo is BF2.
It is. Yeah.
He
was famous for his all Boss board.
His whole Boss board,
but other things.
You hear him in like somebody's song. He's moving the knobs and stuff, and interesting oscillations, and like that record is he loved that. He loved that one.
Yep, I love the BF2, and weirdly, it's still one of the old silver screw made in Japan Boss pedals that you can pick up relatively affordably. I picked mine up for like $99, maybe 3-ish years ago, 2.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
You can still get them fairly cheap for vintage Boss stuff, unless maybe I've talked about it too much and the prices have increased a little bit. That is fun.
I mean, for single note lead lines that are already distorted, it's just like, oh my Lord.
It's so good.
It's so good.
Yep. All right, last question. This is the one that gets a little bit dicey. What is your favorite kind of pizza?
I like thin crust.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. I'm not down with the deep dish. There's a place actually near my house. It's a chain now. Blaze.
Yeah.
Blaze. I'm pretty down with their pizzas. I can eat almost a whole pizza by myself and not feel like I need to go to sleep for 2 days.
I have not had Blaze yet. They haven't quite made it to my neck of the woods, but I will be trying that as soon as they do.
That's pretty cool.
Right on. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know we've gone a little bit over. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, though. This was a lot of fun. Thank you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I had fun, too.
Dude, this is a blast. Definitely stay in touch. So, all right, everybody. For Ken, this is Blake. And as always, folks, good luck and good tones. Woo! That was a great start to the year. Wouldn't you agree? I think that was fantastic. I love it when they go that way. That was just a lot of fun for me. So unfortunately, that was all the time Ken had. That's how it goes sometimes. These people are busy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing, though. Because for this week's Patreon exclusive episode, I hopped on with my good friend Dewey Halpus from the Peer Pleasure podcast. And we went on a retrospective of sorts for the year. We literally recorded this New Year's Day, and we chatted for, well, I don't know, like I think we chatted for like 4 hours total, and we recorded about 2.5 of it. Some of the stuff he kind of hints at on the episode that couldn't be made public, and I understand why. So it's not going to derail the conversation, though. I think you'll really enjoy it. If you haven't heard Dewey's episode of this podcast, I would definitely suggest searching that out to get a little more of his story. But what this is essentially, it's almost 2.5 hours of two podcasters talking about what they do, how they do it, and we pull back the curtain in a lot of ways, kind of revealing, how most podcasters are not Joe Rogan. And we talk a lot about sort of the inner workings of trying to produce these things and get them out in the world and get people to listen to them and the challenges associated with that. But we also talk about some of our favorite episodes from 2021 and why they meant a lot to us and all that jazz. It's a really, really fun chat, and you can find that over on Patreon. If you can support the show there for $5 a month, you will get extra episodes beamed to your ears every week. You can also subscribe through Apple Podcasts. There's a subscribe feature now, and that will hook right to your Apple account, and you'll get that same content sent right to your phone every single week. So I appreciate you. Thank you for hanging out. Please, as always, share this with your friends, and I hope you have a great 2022. I'm going to do my best to make it as entertaining as possible. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye. One last thing before we totally sign off here, I just want to remind you that if you do any shopping at Stringjoy, that's Stringjoy guitar strings made in Nashville, that will help me out as well. As I've said for years, I'm heavily involved in that company, and I really do think they're making the best products on the market. So if you would like to try custom strings, go to tonemob.com/stringjoy and check them out today. I seriously love what the team down there is doing. I help them out with all kinds of things, and by you supporting them, you are also supporting me as well. And hey, you need some strings, so why not get some custom strings just for your guitar and playing style? Again, the link for that is tonemob.com/stringjoy, and that will take you right to their website, and you can do all your shopping through there, and that will help everyone involved out. So thank you very much. Talk to you next time. We are brought to you by the wonderful folks at Gun Street Wiring Shop. Yes, Gun Street Wiring Shop. I've talked about them before. I used to say based out of Bend, Oregon, but guess what? Sean moved to my neck of the woods. Sean's in Portland. Sean is awesome and has helped me with a bunch of stuff lately. And if you have wiring needs for your guitar, he can help you too. If you want to get weird with it, he can get weird. If you just need to spruce things up a little bit, there's your guy. He takes all the guesswork out of doing your guitar wiring, and he makes it simple, and his customer service is top-notch, and I can't say enough good things about Gun Street as a company. I really respect Sean and what he's all about, and the product is top-notch. I've got 3 different guitars that now have Gun Street harnesses in them, and I could not be happier. So go to gunstreetwiringshop.com and check them out.